From Hermetic writings, it appears that the ministry of Hermes was preceded by a vision, or an illumination. This illumination is recorded in the divine Pymander, or as it is more commonly entitled, the Shepherd of Men. After the vision, Hermes went forth to convert the world to the great truths of all time, and thus preached the thrice greatest Hermes. Quote, O people of earth, men born and made of the elements, but with the spirit of the divine within you, rise from your sleep of ignorance. Be sober and thoughtful. Realize that your home is not in the earth, but in the light. Why have you delivered yourselves over unto death, having power to partake of immortality? Repent and change your minds. Depart from the dark and forsake corruption forever. Prepare yourselves to climb through the 7 rings to blend your souls with the eternal light. The Sermon of Hermes seems to have been spoken directly to certain disciples, but there is evidence that he went up and down the land with staff in hand, teaching, preaching, guiding, and calling men to the life of wisdom. Quote, Blessed art thou, O Father. The man thou hast fashioned would be sanctified with thee, as thou hast given him power to sanctify others with thy word and thy truth. End quote. There is only one other fragment of information available. Albert Magnus, the great Catholic father, wrote that Hermes was buried in the valley of Hebron, and that Alexander the Great visited that tomb, which was in a cave. At the order of Alexander, the grave was opened. It was found that the body of the master had turned to dust. Where the body had lain rested a great emerald that had been buried with Hermes. That emerald contained the secrets of the Hermetic arts deeply embossed upon its surface. The writing upon the gem includes a statement of analogy, which is the principal key to the Hermetic sciences. Simply translated, it reads, That which is above is like unto that which is below. And that which is below is like unto that which is above. In the literature of the Egyptians, there is a curious story of the lost books of Hermes, which had been deposited in the bed of the Nile within nested caskets. The books were guarded by strange monsters and contained upon their hieroglyphically adorned pages all of the secrets of magic, such as the invocations of spirits, prayers for the dead, and incantations to be used on all occasions to bring about secretly desired purposes. It is worth noting that Hermes was one of the few pagan philosophers who was not attacked by the early Christian church. He is accepted as a true messenger of God, a great prophet, and his books were in considerable demand among the priests of the North African church. Clement of Alexandria describes the 42 books of Hermes, which were carried by the priests in religious processions. He says that one book of Hermes contained hymns to the gods, another contained the regulations for the life of a king. Then there were 4 relating to the fixed stars, the sun and the moon, and the conjunctions of risings of the heavenly bodies. He mentioned 10 books of honors to the gods, 10 called hieratic, which embodied the laws, and 6 treating of disease. It is extraordinary that these works, which existed in the first centuries of the Christian era, should have entirely disappeared, so that no copy in the Egyptian language is known to exist at all. There can only be but one answer to this. The books were jealously guarded by the priests and were destroyed or hidden at the time when religion declined, so that they would escape profanation at the hands of the unworthy. The Hermetic books now known are probably only late versions of much older writing. The Divine Pymander, which is the most important of the Hermetic fragments, does not seem to have been known earlier than the 2nd century after Christ. This has led to the belief that the Hermetic books were actually written after the beginning of the Christian era by a scholar or a group of scholars profoundly versed in ancient lore and tradition. Seems to me, however, that there is a deep inspirational quality about these writings which does suggest a high and sacred origin. They are too noble, too intrinsically noble to be the production of ordinary mortals. It seems more likely that the older works were fading from the memory of man, and an effort was made to preserve this memory and to save the old wisdom from disappearing entirely under the pressure of early Christianity. Nor is it fair to say that the doctrines of Hermes were plagiarized from the Christian revelation. A deep examination shows that whoever wrote or compiled the Hermetic dialogues was definitely not a Christian, nor was he greatly influenced by Christianity. The whole production is distinctly pagan, but deeply and reverently so. The Pymander can stand beside any sacred book of the world, and is equal to any in the sheer beauty of its composition and the luminousness of the doctrines which it expounds. There can be no doubt that the Hermetic philosophy was the product of a noble, transcendent soul who indeed walked with God in some distant age. The principal source of the Hermetic doctrines is the Pymander, or the Vision. This sets forth a complete system of metaphysical theology and philosophy. Certain other dialogues and fragments with the Pymander make up the Corpus Hermeticum. Nearly all of the Hermetic books are under controversy, because scholars differ widely as to the period of their composition and their place in the religious literature of the world. It is generally acknowledged by most experts that the Hermetic writings, in their present form, are of no great antiquity. They are not old. They were apparently unknown to the Egyptians prior to the Christian era, and first came into prominence in the 3rd or 4th centuries. If these various opinions are in substance correct, and they are the result of extensive scholarship, there must remain a grave doubt as to the authenticity of even the Pymander. It is almost certain that the entire surviving Hermetic literature is but a restatement of much older tradition, now hopelessly lost. It is extraordinary that the name Hermes should be known throughout the world, and yet neither the records of his life nor even his words have survived. Hermes has become a patron of learning associated with all of wisdom, and it is in this capacity that his name has lived. It is also significant that the Hermetic doctrines, though frequently referred to, have never assumed definite shape. They have remained a sort of shadowy force, entirely abstract and obscure. In the earlier times, Hermetism seems to have been cosmological and regenerative. Later it took on the appearance of alchemy and chemistry. Even the Kabbalah and the Pythagorean mathematical teachings were included in its province. And at least in this generation, the word has become synonymous with all metaphysics, New Thought, Transcendentalism, and even spiritualism. This wide diffusion is due to man's lack of actual knowledge of the original teachings. Where nothing is known, everything is suspected, and a dignified name is frequently attached to unmeritorious undertakings. For our present purpose, I think we should limit our consideration of Hermeticism or Hermetism to certain well-defined phrases of the subject. We shall therefore consider 2 headings: the older Hermetic, which we shall designate philosophical, and the later Hermetic, which we shall call alchemical. The earlier school is the more authentic, and the writings of the second group distinctly apocryphal. The principal doctrines of the philosophical are as follows. Hermes taught that the universe was sustained through the energies of certain secondary gods who were manifestors and administrators of the divine will. Of the first god, the recondite source of all things, Hermes actually says very little. It's a matter deemed too profound to be discovered by intellectual process. But although Hermes did not define first cause, he seems to prefer to denominate it the primordial mind, or the supreme being, from whom emanated reason, the sustainer and orderer of all natural phenomena. Thus Hermes was monotheistic in principle and pantheistic in his concept of the secondary principles, which, emerging from the one, became the sustaining power administering the many. In this concept, Hermes parallels Plato, who in slightly different words expresses the same thought, thus revealing the secret of mythologies. The ancient pantheons of divinities are really the personifications of the various attributes of God, of universal life. The universal One first emanates superior beings, and with these, its first progeny. It rules over the mundane sphere and all its creatures. And this mundane sphere and all that it bears upon itself belongs to secondary emanations, and is therefore less proximate to the divine relation, less proximate to reason. The gods, or administrators, who do the will of the Father, circulate through their own natures the heavenly fire, which is the life of all things. These gods are the planets and the stars, which move in orbits, or within certain boundaries anyway. These orbits he calls thrones, and from their fiery rings the governors rule the sublunary sphere, controlling it by the strange force which Hermes calls destiny. Thus, in the Hermetic writings, we have an authority for the ancient belief in astrology. The planetary governors, ruling terrestrial concerns, manifest by their ponderous motions and mutual combinations the purposes and the will of God. In cosmogony, the Hermetic system is probably either the source or the principal determining factor in the Ptolemaic theory, where the Earth is placed in the center of the universe and the planets and luminaries circle around in its orbits. The Egyptians symbolized this by the cross-section of the onion. Beyond the orbits of the planets was the circle of the fixed stars, which constituted the wall of heaven, or outer boundary of the mundane complex. This is the system which is used in the Revelation of St. John, and forms the working key to nearly all occult cosmogonies. St. John is going through the little door in the wall of heaven, and emerges into the empyrean, or the divine world, outside the bubble of the cosmos. According to Hermes, the orbits of the 7 planets, known to the ancients, they formed a ladder connecting heaven with earth, and conversely, earth with heaven. This was the sacred ladder of 7 rungs, perhaps the ladder of Jacob, and also the ladder of the golden cords by which Mohammed ascended to the footstool of God in the celebrated night journey. The planets are also the 7 seals of Revelation, which must be opened, the 7 gates of the Mithraic mysteries. They are the 7 trumpets, the 7 vials, and the 7 churches. The powers which emanate from them are 7 cardinal virtues, and the perversions of those powers, the 7 deadly sins. They are the 7 sacraments, the 7 Elohim of the Jews, the 7 great gods of the Egyptians, and so on, and so on. In fact, all the mysterious septenary powers of antiquity. In the Pymander it tells us that upon their thrones sat the 7 governors administering the whirlwind of cosmic powers. When the divine emanations were complete, the one mind caused nature and the lower elements to be manifested out of its own being. It established nature on its eternal foundations and gave it to the governors to be ruled over with eternal wisdom. Nature, out of its yearnings, brought forth life, creeping and crawling things, and creatures of the deep, and soulless monsters who had forms but were too distant from the light to have souls. Out of the strivings of the earth came forth also dragons and monsters, and the strange creatures described by the ancients. And thus nature was formed, and the governors gave it shape. But it did not live, because the great mind had not yet bestowed it life. In its wisdom the supreme mind, Father of all things, fashioned man, a superior and beautiful creature made in the likeness of the light, and in the likeness of the full effulgence in all its parts. And this man dwelt with the Father, and like unto the Father to this man was given dominion, not only over the world, but over the governors of the world. This reminds us of the story of the infant Bacchus, to whom Zeus gave the universe as a plaything, or Dionysus, who was presented with the spinning top, which he might whirl forever. But the governors bowed down to the man who had been fashioned, the metaphysical man who had no body but was all soul. And each of the governors bestowed upon the man one of his qualities, so that he gained inwardly 7 natures, gifts of the gods of the 7 worlds. Now, this divine man, gazing down into the deep, saw the physical world as though it were a mirror or a smooth ocean. In it he beheld his own likeness, shadowed in the deep, and like Narcissus, in the Greek legend, he became enamored of his own shadow and desired to descend into it. Thus desire came into being, and with desire, its fulfillment, for that which mind desires, it does accomplish. And the man descended into the abyss. He entered into his shadow, and the shadow entered into him. The mind which had been above the mystery became part of the mystery, and the lower world received the mind, and the creatures of the abyss became mindful, and the man forgot his kinship with the light, and began to struggle outwardly to gain that which was already his own inner nature. Ages passed. The one man had become humanity, and all human beings together were one supermundane entity. And in all men was the longing of the one to be returned to the light. The 7 principles which the 7 governors had bestowed upon the divine man had become 7 bodies, or physical principles, and the governors, working upon their own principles in man, enslaved him, and left him the victim of the limitations which bodies and senses do impose. Such was the state of affairs when Hermes, sitting alone on the side of a mountain, received his vision. The heavens parted, and the dragon of wisdom stood before him. And the dragon said, I, thy God, am the light, and the mind, which were before substance, was divided from spirit, and darkness was divided from light. Hermes bowed to the Great One and besought Poimandres to reveal the way which by men might be restored again to the light. The dragon of wisdom replied, The path of immortality is hard, and only a few find it. The rest await the great day when the wheels of the universe shall be stopped, and the immortal sparks shall escape from the sheaths of their substance. Woe unto those who wait, for they must return again, unconscious and unknowing, to the seed ground of stars, and await a new beginning. Those who are saved by the light of the mystery which I have revealed unto you, O Hermes, and which I now bid you to establish among men, they shall return again to the Father, who dwells in the white light, and they shall deliver themselves up to the light, and shall be absorbed into the light, and in the light they shall become powers one with God. This is the way of good, and it is revealed only to them that have wisdom. In the vision it is further described how the truth-seeker, climbing the ladder of the stars, returns to the governors that portion of their natures which was derived from them. Thus he returns to the sun and its lord his ambitions, to Mars and its governors his boldness, to Jupiter he returns his wealth, until at last, purified of all temporal things, the soul escapes from the rings, because there is nothing left of the nature of the rings in itself. Until such a time as this escape is possible, life and death are merely alternatives between an embodied and disembodied state. But whether physically alive or physically dead, the entity remains in the natural world. Only wisdom can release it from the rings of temporality. Therefore, we may say that the Hermetic philosophy, in its older form, is a redemptive teaching, leading man to a state of well-being through the practice of virtues and through rites of purification. The latter school was founded upon the doctrines of Hermes, which circulated among the eclectics of Alexandria and later among the Arabs, drifting back into Europe through the Dark Ages. These assumed an almost exclusively chemical terminology and interpretation. The difference between these philosophical and alchemical schools may be more apparent than real, but certainly for the alchemists of the Middle Ages, Hermes was a transmuter of metals and not a redeemer of men. Thousands of sincere human souls built furnaces in their spare rooms and became prey to a violent and insidious superstition. The Street of the Gold Makers at Prague is an example of the road faced on either side by houses of alchemists. And man, ever elevating the temporal state above his divine expectations, brewed and distilled, evaporated and condensed, fermented and decomposed practically every substance distinguishable to the senses, all in the hopes that by some amazing dispensation he might find a lump of the purest gold. Hundreds of writers called upon the Hermetic gods for aid, and numerous chemical formulations accredited to Hermes himself were published and distributed to an avid populace. It probably began when some chemist-philosopher discovered that the secrets of human regeneration could be appropriately concealed under chemical terminology. Gold was spirit or God. The 7 base metals were the powers of the 7 governors. The retort was the human body. The fire was aspiration. And the tortured chemicals seething in the bottles aptly illustrated man's troublous state. But the moment an idea is clothed in symbolism, a certain part of mankind lacks the penetration to discover the real under the figure. As a result, Hermetic science descended into a frenzied effort to find the powder of projection, the elixir of life, in the philosopher's stone. One alchemist announced that 1 grain of this powder would transmute into purest gold 100,000 times its own weight. But his readers did not realize that this power was wisdom, 1 grain of which could transmute all the ignorance in the world. Nor did the reader understand that the philosopher's stone was knowledge, the great miracle worker, or that the elixir of life was truth, which made all things new. It is sad that misunderstandings should exist, but wherever great truths are given to small minds, misunderstandings are inevitable. Thus, in medieval literature, the word Hermetic actually means chemical, or more properly, philosophy, in terms of chemistry. Of the latter Hermetic philosophers, the most important were probably the Rosicrucians and Paracelsists. The Rosicrucian order was composed of persons who had come to realize the Hermetic Arcanum was a cleverly concealed story of human regeneration. Deeply thoughtful men, not to be intrigued by the promise of material gold, discovered and set forth the secret keys to the chemical fable. Having restored the philosophy, they sought to privately circulate it among the learned of Europe in the hope that it would bring about the transmutation of empires, and it would tincture with the fire of immortality the crumbling creeds and cults that lived on from an age unaware of their divine birthright. There is a divine science hidden under the chemical writings of such men as Paracelsus, George Ripley, Roger Bacon. There can be no doubt that these men were genuine Hermetic adepts who, realizing these pearls must not be cast before swine, wrote obscurely, but included in their writings sufficient hints and suggestions that the worthy would not be deceived. Each man read into the writing that which was his own vision. Some, therefore, sought the redemption of themselves, but most continued to strive for the fabled red lion and the hope of terrestrial immortality. In closing, these are a few quotations from The Vision of Hermes, the Divine Pymander. Listen within yourself and look to the infinitude of space and time. There can be heard the songs of the constellations, the voices of the numbers, and the harmony of the spheres. To know divine thought, O souls, you descend and painfully ascend the path of the 7 planets and of their 7 heavens. The sleep of the body is the sober watchfulness of the mind, and the shutting of my eyes reveals true light. Holy is God, who has determined that he shall be known, and who is known by his own, to whom he reveals himself. My silence is filled with budding life and hope, and is full of good. My words are the blossoms of the fruit of my soul. For this is the faithful account of what I have received from my true mind, through whom I became inspired by God with the truth. Since that day my mind has ever been with me, and in my own soul it has given birth to the Word. The Word is reason.